Loki.
When men perform it, it involves cross-dressing, something that is inherently shameful in Norse culture. In fact, Odin and Loki have an exchange of words about it in the poem Lokasenna, Loki's Quarrel. When Odin accuses Loki of spending 8 winters under the earth in the form of a milch cow and a woman, bearing children there, Loki retorts that his blood brother practiced sager on the island of Samsø, modern Samsø, lying between Sweden and Denmark, and beat on the drum as seeresses do. Frigg quickly intervenes to tell the two gods not to discuss such mysterious, ancient matters in public. Thor's chief role is to defend the god's realm against the depredations of giants. He spends much of his time journeying in the east, where he wages war with his mighty hammer Mjolnir on giants and giantesses alike. He is the one god who forges a close relationship with humans. He has two servants, a boy and a girl, called Thjalfi and Roskva. Although Loki's giant affiliation should make Thor highly suspicious of him, the two gods often adventure together. Thor's opponent at Ragnarok is the Midgard serpent, a child of Loki, who will rise out of the sea. Balder has little to do in the Norse myth except to die. Of all the gods, he is the one who has the strongest kinship ties, and when, before his death, he begins to have bad dreams, both his parents spring into action. He is accidentally slain by his brother, while his wife dies of grief at his funeral. It's foretold that he will come back to his dwelling of the gods after Ragnarok. This piece of information is crucial for Odin, for it offers him hope that some gods will return to make the world anew. Occupying a strange and ambivalent position, Loki has mixed parentage, which makes his loyalties uncertain. He is Odin's blood brother, and the highest god has sworn never to drink ale unless Loki is also offered a drink. Loki is always getting the gods in trouble, and thus often has to get them out again. His luck runs out when, through his boasting in the poem Loki's Quarrel, his role in the death of Balder becomes clear, and he is captured and bound until Ragnarok. On that day he will declare his final allegiance to the giants and march with them against the gods. Loki's mother seems to be a goddess, and his father a giant, a match which runs contrary to normal divine marriage rules. His relationship with the giantess brings forth monstrous offspring. His gender is also subject to slippage. He's the mother of the 8-legged horse Sleipnir. He becomes pregnant from eating a half-cooked female heart, and, as Odin claims, he seems to have spent 8 winters underground as a woman. Loki and his invention, the fishing net. A net such as this brings about Loki's capture. Loki, son of a goddess and a giant. Good-looking but nasty in temperament and variable in behavior. Exceptionally cunning, while his sexuality is distinctly polymorphous. Married to Sigyn, has 2 sons. Snorri names them Vali and Nari of Narfi. The Poetic Edda calls them Nari and Narfi, father of these cosmic monsters by the giantess Angrboda, Fenrir, the mighty ward serpent, and Hel, goddess of death. Also the mother of Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. Freya, whose name means lady, is the goddess most closely associated with sexuality, though she also has some kind of authority over the dead. Her husband Odr has gone off on a long journey, and Freya weeps tears of gold in his absence. Loki accuses her of having sex with her brother. But then, as a fertility goddess associated with love affairs, Freya seems to have had sex with everyone. Of the Aesir and the elves who are in here, each one has been your lover, claims Loki. Tyr, the one-handed god, gives victory in battle. He lost his hand in the jaws of the great wolf Fenrir. He is associated with the law and justice, and, meanly, Loki twits him on his lack of even-handedness in this respect. Sif is married with Thor and had an exceptionally beautiful golden hair. This was stolen by Loki. How is unclear, but he insinuates that he has slept with her, and that may have offered the opportunity for his theft. Sif wept for the loss of her locks, but Loki made amends with a dwarf-made substitute set of tresses, long braided hair. This wig grafted itself instantly onto Sif's head, and was even lovelier than the original. Sif's hair is thus the kenning for gold. Idun, married to Bragi, is the guardian of the apples of eternal youth. The gods need to eat these regularly if they are to remain young and vigorous. When she and her apples are kidnapped by a scheming giant, the gods quickly fade and grow old. It's a situation which, as usual, Loki is responsible for creating, and which he has to remedy through his habitual ingenuity. Since only their feet are visible, she ends up selecting Njordr, the god associated with the sea, whose feet are, of course, remarkably bright and clean. Skadi is displeased, for she had hoped to win Balder as husband, but she's persuaded by Loki that if he can make her laugh, she will accept the situation. Grim-faced Skadi is in no mood for amusement, but Loki ties a goat by the beard to his testicles, and each of them pulls in different directions. Both of them screeched very loudly at that, Snorri says. Loki tumbles into Skadi's lap, and finally she laughs. The sexualized burlesque has done its work, though, as we'll see. The marriage between Skadi and Njordr is not a successful one. Yggdrasil also shelters under its canopy Mimir's well, and perhaps also the body of water by which the Fates dwell. Shining white mud cascades down the tree, apparently onto Heimdall, for Loki accuses him of having a mucky back. Also located in the well, it said, are Heimdall's hearing and Odin's eye, pledged in exchange for a drink from the water. The two key organs sacrificed by the gods. The third, Tyr's hand, doubtless gulped down by Fenrir when he bit it off, is irrecoverable, remain close at hand. The dwarfs live either underground or in the rocks, and they work away at forging metal and crafting precious things. Some of the gods' most important treasures are dwarf-made, such as Freyr's folding ship Skidbladnir, the golden tresses of Sif, which replace the hair stolen by Loki, and Odin's spear Gungnir. Another dwarf, Brokkr, wagered with Loki that he and his brother could make 3 equally good treasures. The stake was Loki's head. This competition was a close-run thing, for Brokkr and his brother created the golden-bristled boar Gullinbursti, on which Freyr rides, thus taking care of Vanir interests, the golden ring Draupnir, which drops Mjolnir. Loki tried hard to sabotage the process by transforming himself into a buzzing horsefly and stinging the craftsmen. They managed to ignore the persistent pest except during the final task, forging Mjolnir. The momentary distraction was enough to cause the hammer's handle to come out a bit short. Nonetheless, the jury of the gods agreed that Mjolnir was so superior a giant smashing treasure that Brokkr was the clear winner and that Loki must yield up his head. The ingenious god wriggled out of his fate by stipulating that Brokkr might take his head, but not his neck, and since not even a dwarf was dexterous enough to accomplish this, Loki was spared. But Brokkr brought it about that Loki's mouth was sewn up instead, so that he might not perform further verbal trickery, and thereafter the god has had a crooked mouth. And that's an image that isn't altogether inappropriate for someone known as Regjandi Godna. The bad-mouther of the gods Freya, the goddess offers gold and silver in abundance in exchange for the Brisinga men. But the dwarfs are adamant about the price. Freya must spend a night with each of them, and to this she reluctantly agrees. After 4 nights the neck ring is hers. Odin demands that Loki steal the treasure for him, and he buzzes in fly form into Freya's otherwise impenetrable chamber. She is sleeping with her new acquisition around her neck, lying on top of the clasp, and so Loki, transforming himself into a flea, has to bite her very precisely in order to get her to turn over without waking up. Freya stirs in her sleep, and the Brisinga men is soon in Loki's hands and subsequently Odin's, made by Halfdan Egidius. One of the first things that was talked about was that cross-dressing is not very well received in the Norse myth. The picture above is an example. This is called Seder. We know very little about Seder as a set of magical practices. It may have been a form of spirit divination associated with the Sami, Lapps, The Scandinavians' northern neighbors. Loki's taunting of Odin that you beat on a drum as Cirrus's do suggests Sami-type ritual. Usually women perform cedar. In Eric's Saga Rauda, Eric the Red's saga, a seeress, wearing a glass bead necklace and catskin gloves after a meal consisting mostly of animal hearts, sits on a special platform aided by ritual chanting. She prophesies when the famine in that part of Greenland will end. Cross-dressing seems to be involved for male sane men. This is particularly disreputable. An early Norwegian king thought nothing of drowning 80 such wizards by marooning them on a skerry, a low-lying group of rocks in the sea, for plotting against his life. Thor's battle at Geirrodr's house. One such battle is recorded unusually in skaldic poem. Loki has flown into the giant Geirrodr's territory using the flying cloak and has been captured. In order to ransom himself, Loki promises to induce Thor to come to Geirrodr's home without his hammer Mjolnir or his belt of divine power. It's a trap. Fortunately, Thor and his servant Thjolfi stop off at home of a giantess called Gridr, and the gods borrows a spare magic belt, her staff, and some iron gloves. The weather in the mountains is grim, the river rises, and the travelers are nearly swept away. They realize that the rising river is caused by one of Geirrodr's daughters urinating. Thor throws a stone up at her and dams the river at its source, or so he quips. At Geirrodr's, Thor is accommodated in a guest room, but when he makes himself comfortable on a chair, it rises towards the ceiling, threatening to crush him. Using Gridr's magic staff for support, Thor bears down on the chair. Not only does he save himself, he breaks the backs of the giant daughters hiding beneath it. When Thor is summoned into Geirrodr's hall, the giant casts glowing red-hot molten metal at him, but with his handy iron glove, Thor catches the missile and throws it straight back, through a pillar behind which the giant is sheltering, and through the giant himself. Thor triumphs once again. Snorri's version of this story tailors it into a little romance. Freyr catches sight of Gerdr from Odin's high seat Hlidskjalf, and there's a distinct suggestion that his passion is a punishment for his trespass into the divine leader's space. Gerdr is undeniably lovely. Her arms shine, and from them all the sea and the air catch light. Skirnir is briskly dispatched and soon returns with the lady's agreement. There is no mention of her resistance or of the curse. The story is recounted in the tricking of Gylfi to explain why Freyr has no sword, with the implication that it was foolish to trade that symbol of warlike masculinity for a mere woman, a misjudgment which Loki echoes in his critique of all the gods in Loki's quarrel. How will Freyr fight at Ragnarok? Loki taunts him. Now he's given away his sword for Gemir's daughter. Whether Gerdr consented to marry Freyr and came, like Skadi, to live among the gods, or whether the Pish's sword was bartered simply for a night of sexual satisfaction, is not related here. Elsewhere, Gerdr is explicitly identified as Freyr's wife, and they have a son Fjolnir, ancestor of the Swedish kings. Njordr and Freyr end up with partners who are giantesses, not goddesses. It seems clear when only 3 days of winter are left that the heavenly bodies of Freya will be lost, unless someone can come up with a plan, and Loki, blamed for persuading the gods to accept the original agreement, is threatened with death if he can't find a way of disrupting the builder's schedule. Loki turns himself into a mare who entices the builder's helpful stallion away with a whinny and a toss of her mane. Although the builder pursues his horse all night long through the forest, the construction timetable is fatally curtailed. At this, the builder falls into giant rage and reveals his true identity. Despite the oaths of safety which had been sworn to the builder, Thor is summoned, and on the grounds that the builder is not who he purported to be, the god annihilates the giant with his hammer. 8 months later, Loki gives birth to a foal, the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, who carries Odin through all the worlds. There's a certain wistfulness about the giant's realization of his successive losses. His goblet is smashed over his own head, his cauldron is confiscated, and his wife connives with her son and his notorious giant-slaying companion to seize or destroy her husband's treasured possessions. How Tyr's mother comes to be married to a giant? Why, the god associated with law and justice, should have giant paternity is unknown. It has been suggested that perhaps Loki once occupied Tyr's role in the story. If so, it wouldn't be the only adventure in which Loki and Tyrs team up, and Loki seems to be of mixed Aesir giant blood. We saw above how the Master Builder was thwarted in the nick of time from taking possession of the sun, moon, and Freya, almost plunging the world of gods and men in endless darkness. This is not the only encounter move in the battle for vital treasures that the gods and giants wage. On another occasion, Loki is taken captive by the giant Thesi, Skadi's father. Three gods, Loki, Odin, and the mysterious Honir, were away on a journey, and they killed and began to cook an ox. But the meat would not cook, and after a while the baffled and hungry gods realized that up in the oak tree beneath which they were cooking sat an enormous eagle. He declared himself responsible for inhibiting the cooking process. Loki seeked a great pole and struck at the eagle with it. The eagle flew off, but the pole, and Loki with it, stuck to the bird. Loki was borne away, his shoulders in severe danger of dislocation as he desperately clung on. To save his life, Loki agreed to the eagle's demand, for he was the giant Tyzi in disguise. He would entice Idun out of Augsgarder and into the giant's power. By telling Idun that he had found some apples which looked very much like hers out in the forest and persuading her to bring the apples with her, for the purpose of comparison, Loki tricked Idun into leaving Asgarder with him. Thesi swooped down on her and flew away with her, apples and all. Once again, having got the gods into trouble, Loki is charged with sorting out the situation. For with Idun's loss, the gods no longer have access to the apples of eternal youth and they begin to age. A council meeting reveals that Idun was last seen in Loki's company. His complicity in her disappearance is proven. Freya's falcon feather cloak, Loki flies to Chaizi's hall, where he takes advantage of the giant's absence out fishing to turn Idun into a nut. He makes off with her and her vital apples. When Chaizi discovers his loss, he pursues Loki in eagle form. The Aesir make a great pile of wood shavings within the precincts of Asgardr, and while the exhausted Loki drops down with his burden just within the wall, the eagle is unable to stop and overflies his prey. The gods set fire to the wood shavings, and the eagle's feathers are soon ablaze. When he abandons his avian form, the gods swiftly kill him. Chazi's death brings Skadir to Asgard seeking compensation. This mythic pattern, in which the giant sees hold of something crucial to the god's well-being, is burlesqued in Tumskvida, Tumskoum. Thor awakens one morning to find that his hammer Mjolnir is missing. His beard bristles in alarm and he calls for Loki. For once, Loki is not behind the theft and he willingly borrows Freya's feather cloak and heads to the giant lands. Here he encounters the giant Therm, who is sitting on a grave mound, plaiting leashes for his elegant hunting dogs, and neatly trimming his horses' manes. This is clearly a giant with aristocratic pretensions. Therm readily admits that he has the hammer and states that he will return it only if he is given Freya as his bride. With a typical lack of subtlety, they badly announce to the goddess that she is to put on a bridal headdress and get ready to drive to the giant lands to be wed. Freya does not take this news well. Furious then was Freya, and snorted in rage. The whole hall of the Aesir trembled that the great neck ring of the Brisings fell from her. You'll know me to be the most man-mad of women if I drive with you to the land of the giants. Part of the joke, of course, is that Freya is the most man-mad of women, but even she draws the line at marrying a giant. What to do? The gods meet in council, and Heimdall comes up with the wonderful idea of dressing Thor as a woman and sending him in Freya's place. Thor's strenuous objections go unheeded for, as Loki points out. Unless the hammer is restored, the giants will soon be moving into Asgard. And so Thor is attired in women's clothes, complete with bridal headdress and a bunch of keys, symbol of female authority within the home, hanging from his girdle. Freya lends her neck ring, the Brisingamen, as a final authentic touch. Loki too dons female dress, and the pair set off in Thor's goat-drawn chariot. Meanwhile, in the giant lands, Thrym is quivering with excitement, ordering preparations to be made for the wedding feast and bragging about his possessions. Gold-horned cows walk here in the yard, jet-black oxen to the giant's delight. Heaps I have of treasures, heaps I have of luxuries, only Freya seemed to be missing. A heavily veiled Freya sits down to the feast and astonishes her bridegroom by consuming 1 whole ox, 8 salmon, all the dainties meant for the women. Loki, as bridesmaid, hastily explains that her mistress has not eaten for 8 nights, so madly keen was she to come to the giant lands. Thrym thinks to steal a kiss from his bride, but when he peeps under the veil, he is alarmed by the lady's fiery red eyes. Quick-thinking Loki explains that this is caused by sleeplessness in anticipation of the wedding. The giant's sister demands gifts from the bride. Then the hammer is finally produced in order to sanctify the marriage, perhaps a reference to actual wedding rituals. As soon as Thor has his hammer in his hand, he smashes the wheedling sister-in-law and slaughters all the rest of the wedding guests before he and Loki set off home. Asgard is safe once more, and the hammer is back with its rightful owner. This tale may be a rather late one, given the lack of seriousness with which the gods are treated. Both Thor and Freya are undignified in their emotional responses. Thor gropes around for his hammer before yelling for Loki. Freya's snorting and her heaving bosom cause her favorite adornment to snap and fall from her, and we remember the high price that she paid the dwarfs for it. Thrym's social pretensions are neatly skewered by his self-satisfaction. All he needed was the goddess of beauty and sex as his wife to complete his collection of valuables. The comedy of that most masculine of the gods being forced into women's clothing, and Loki's alacrity in offering to go along also in female dress, points on the one hand to the gender ambiguity that surrounds Loki and his shape-shifting, and other transgender activities, particularly if undertaken in connection with the practice of Seir. Odin is less sensitive in this regard. He is not above disguising himself as a woman, if circumstances demand it. The most elaborate tale of Thor's dealing with the giants is told at length by Snorri. Thor and Loki set out one day to go adventuring in the goat-drawn chariot. This is when Thor acquires his 2 human servants, and later the next evening the party finds itself in the forest. Ahead is some kind of a hall, so they seek shelter there, but in the middle of the night there's an earthquake, and the alarmed party huddle in a smaller room just off the main hall. The next day, when they come out of the hall, they find a huge man lying snoring beside it, the source of the previous night's earthquake. Thor is about to strike this figure with his hammer when he awakens. He recognizes the god, whom he greets by name, and asks, "Why did you drag off my glove?" The astonished travelers realize that the hall in which they spent the night was the giant's glove, while the side room was the thumb. The giant, who calls himself Skurmir, offers his companionship, and they journey together. All their provisions are placed in a bag, which Skurmir carries. That evening, Thor proves unable to open it to get dinner while the giant takes a nap. So annoyed is the god that he strikes Skurmir the mightiest blow he can muster with Mjolnir. But the giant opens his eyes, mutters that a leaf must have fallen on him from the oak tree under which he is snoozing, and inquires as to whether they've had their dinner. The humiliated god dissembles about their hunger, and in the middle of the night he strikes the sleeping Skirmir a second blow. A mere acorn, the giant claims when he's awakened by it. A third attack is no more successful. The next day, Skirmir parts company with the divine party as they come to a Fiant dwelling named Utgarder. Its lord is also called Loki, taking his by-name from his home. Skirmir warns his new friends not to be cheeky at Utgarda Loki's place, since they are mere babes in arms in comparison with the mighty men in the fortress, and the inhabitants of the hall are indeed impressively large. Utgarda Loki welcomes his guests and invites them to take part in various competitions for general amusement. First up is Loki, who volunteers in an eating contest. Though he clears his trough of food in record time, his opponent Logi eats not only the food and the bones, but also the trough itself. Wee runs a race against a certain Hugi. Though the boy does well, over the best of three, he's clearly the loser. Thor's participation in a drinking competition is also pitiful. He's challenged to drain a horn of liquid which, apparently, can usually be drained by the feeblest drinker in 3 draughts, but even after 3 lung-bursting gulps, the level in the horn has only sunk a fraction. Now, Utgarda Loki expresses his scorn by inviting the god to try 2 further exploits, picking up his cat and wrestling with his old nurse. Alas, Thor is no more impressive. He can only raise one paw of the cat from the ground, while the nurse, Ellie, manages to drop Thor onto one knee. Thoroughly embarrassed by their team's performance, Thor and his friends nevertheless enjoy the hospitality on offer, and after an excellent breakfast, they ready themselves to go home. Utgarda Loki accompanies them some distance from his stronghold and reveals the truth of what's been going on. He'll never be letting the mighty god back under his roof, so dangerous is he. For Utgarda, Loki, and Skirmir are one and the same. The food bag was tied with magic wire. The sleeping giant had magically interposed a mountain between his head and Thor's hammer blows, and the evidence, a tabletop mountain, now with 3 square valleys in it, is visible some way off. As for the contest within Utgarder itself, Loki had been pitched against Fire, who, of course, had no difficulty in consuming the food trough. Thialfi had raced against Thought, and the drinking horn had been connected to the ocean. No wonder, then, that Thor had not been able to drain it, though his efforts in lowering the level in the horn explain the existence of the tides. The black cat, well, that was none other than the mighty Midgard's serpent itself, while Ellie the nurse was old age, who brings every man to his knees sooner or later. Having imparted this information, Utgarda Loki and his hall vanished, just as Thor is raising Mjolnir in order to annihilate him. This tale, with its allegorical representation of fire, thought, and old age, suggests that Snorri expanded on an earlier tale in which Thor meets a cunning giant with an enormous glove. In Loki's quarrel, Loki twits the god with having cowered in the glove and with failing to open the food bag. These elements at least must be traditional. One curious detail is Skirmir's assumed name of Utgarda Loki. Is he at some level a double of Loki? Does the cunning god divide himself between playing the brains of Thor's brawn and displaying a clear giant aspect bent on defending the giantlands against Thor's readiness to lash out with his hammer? It's one thing to cheer Thor killing all the giant wedding guests after Trimmer stole his hammer, or smashing Hymir and his troops when he reneged on the promise to let Thor have the cauldron, or to hear at second hand of his slaughter of giants away in the east. But it's quite another to see him ready to murder a sleeping man who sought only to embarrass, not to harm him. Thor's dignity is somewhat recuperated by the revelation that he has been matched against metaphysical forces, yet once he finds him, many of the major myths then show giants and gods battling for possession over treasures which symbolize mastery over some aspect of culture. Mostly the gods come out on top, but the giants have their victories, and there's a disquieting sense that one day, the day of Ragnarok, they will have the advantage. Loki is their inside man, occupying a strangely liminal space between gods and giants. His history and his role until the onset of events heralding Ragnarok. Loki is a disturbing and tantalizing figure in the divine pantheon. There is no evidence that he was ever worshipped. The cunning choose Odin as their patron, and he does not give his name to farms, hills, or other landscape features. He's said to be the son of Laufey and Fa Bauti, a goddess and perhaps a giant. If his father were a giant, it would explain both his transgressive nature, such relationships are normally forbidden, and his split loyalties. Loki is counted among the gods. He has sworn blood brotherhood with Odin, and although he takes many oaths lightly, Odin never discounts this tie. Loki is among the Aesir early in their history, helping them wriggle out of the bargain with the Master Builder and setting out on journeys with Odin and Honir to see what is happening in the world. His impulsive behavior on one such expedition led to his betrayal of Idun to Thysi. Loki's ambiguousness extends to shape-shifting and gender-bending, mating with Svadilfari, the best of horses. According to a mysterious sequences in Hyndluljóð, Hyndla's song, Loki ate some heart, roasted on a lindenwood fire, a woman's thought stone that he found half singed. Lopter was impregnated by a wicked woman from whom every ogress on earth is descended. Lopter is another name for Loki. Here he becomes part of the genealogy of all the giantesses by perversely incorporating a female heart inside himself. Loki has two sons by his wife Sigyn, variously named Vali, though that this son should share name with Odin's late-born avenger Balder seems unlikely, or Nari and Narfi. Outside wedlock, however, he fathers three children with the giantess Angerboda. These are Fenrir the wolf, the Midgard serpent, and Hel, the goddess of death. The monstrous offspring strike alarm into the gods. The Midgard serpent is cast out into the ocean, where it lies with its tail in its mouth. Hel, with a face that is half corpse blue, half healthy human pink, is given the realm of Niflheimer Mistworld to rule over, the place where the unheroic dead, women, children, and those who do not die in battle go. Fenrir the wolf is reared in Asgardr, but he is soon eating the gods out of the house and home, and it is decreed that he must be chained up. The gods cannot find a fetter strong enough to bind him, and after several failed attempts, which amuse Fenrir hugely, they make a pact with the dwarfs to make a magical chain, forged from 6 things, some impossible, as a cat's footfall sound, a woman's beard, a mountain's roots, a fish's breath, and some more ordinary, a bear's sinews and a bird's spittle. The bond was soft, silky, and smooth. Fenrir smelled something fishy about this seemingly harmless ribbon and demanded a pledge that the gods would release him from the fetter if he could not break it. As the gods hesitated, Tyr bravely stepped up to place his right hand in the beast's mouth. The fetter was wound about the wolf's paws, and it hardened into iron as the beast struggled against it. Then, says Snorri, everyone laughed, except Tyr. He lost his hand. Fenrir was imprisoned in a cave, and a sword was stuck between upper and lower jaws as a prop, so that his mouth must always gape open. Slaver runs from his jaws, forming one of the mighty rivers of the other world, and there he waits for the end of time, the coming of Ragnarok. Loki's monstrous offsprings. Loki's children represent the metaphysical limitations of the created world. Fenrir figures the forces of time. His kin lope through the sky in the tracks of the sun and moon, tongues lolling and jaws agape. On that great day, they will swallow up the heavenly bodies entirely. The Midgard serpent marks the outer edge of the known seas, also called All Land's Girdler. It holds the world together within its closed circle. And Hel, the personification of death, is a hospitable hostess, welcoming the dead to her hall, which they can never depart. She is the archetype of all the desiring and alluring female fate figures waiting to welcome men into their eternal embrace. Regin and Fafnir were brothers. Their third brother, Otter, used to transform himself into an otter to catch fish. One day the three gods Loki, Odin, and Honir came upon him, and Loki threw a stone at Otter, killing him. The gods took the otter skin and unwittingly showed it to Hreidmar, Otter's father, who promptly demanded recompense for his son. Balder seems then to be doomed. In Snorri's account, it's Frigg, the god's energetic mother, who works her way through creation to long the oaths of everything to refuse to harm her son. Fire and water, iron and all kinds of metal, stones, the earth, wood, sickness, animals, birds, poison, serpents, all swear to do him no harm. What then could bring about the god's death? Frigg had not bothered with the lowly mistletoe, for it seemed to her too young and tender, and she let slip this information to an inquisitive woman who visits her in the hall Fensalir. That was her mistake, for the woman was Loki in Sidguise, and he makes good use of this information. Meanwhile, the gods are amusing themselves mightily at their meeting place. Balder stands in the middle, and the others hurl missiles at him. All their weapons bounce harmlessly off him, a temptation to complacency perhaps. Standing sadly at the edge of the group is Hoder, Balder's brother, who is blind and who can't take part in the game. But hears a friendly voice in his ear asking if he wants a go. A slender dart is slipped into his hand, and the speaker guides his aim so that it hits its mark. Balder falls. A great wail goes up from all the gods, and Loki slips away in the hubbub. The mistletoe dart has brought down the best of the gods. Odin is doubly grief-stricken. Not only is his son dead, but he knows that this death is a clear portent of Ragnarok. Little Vali was indeed prodigious. Like Helgi, he was ready to fight at 1 night old, says the seeress's prophecy. He never washed his hands, nor combed his hair until he brought Balder's adversary to the funeral pyre. But it's the poor blind brother, Hoder, the slayer by hand, not Loki, the slayer by plan, the one behind the murder, whom Vali kills. For Loki's fate is written differently, the binding of Loki. Snorri follows his account of the failure to weep Balder out of hell with the god's swift pursuit. Capture and binding is consequent on his final rupture with his fellow gods. Remember the feast at Aegir's Hall, the one that required Hymir's extra enormous cauldron? All the gods and goddesses were there except for Thor, who was away as usual smiting giants in the east, and Loki, who is persona non grata, yet he presents himself coolly at the hall and demands to be assigned a seat and given a drink. Bragi, the god of poverty, is ready to refuse him, but once Loki invokes the blood-brother relationship between himself and Odin, and reminds the god that he had sworn never to drink unless Loki were offered drink too, Odin decrees that the father of the wolf must be admitted. In the poem Loki's Quarrel, which relates in this tale, Loki now proceeds systematically to insult each of the gods in turn. The pattern is quite uniform. Loki insults God A replies, Loki responds, and God B speaks up in A's defense, only to draw Loki's bat-mouthing down upon himself. The gods are subjected to a range of calumnies. Odin has performed satyr and is an oath breaker. Other gods are cowards or have been disgraced in some way. Nir is accused of letting Hymir's daughter, giantesses, here probably symbolizing rivers, piss in his mouth as the rivers run into the sea, and of having fathered his children on his sister. The goddesses are charged with sexual promiscuity, often with having sex with Loki himself, or, like Skadi, they are reminded of Loki's role in their kinsman's death. Frigg is taunted with her loss of Balder, and Freya with having slept with every man within the hall, including her own brother. Even Sif, Thor's wife, is charged with having slept with Loki, and he wondered just how it was that Loki was able to steal Sif's wonderful golden hair. Finally, Thor arrives, and with his habitual bellowing and threats, puts a stop to Loki's barbs. notwithstanding some telling remarks about Thor's behavior in the Skyrmir. That may be the crack about the master builder and the oath breaking that inaugurated Asgarder's new walls. Maybe it's a rueful recognition of the risks involved in annoying Thor. As far as we can tell from other sources, most of what Loki says is true, and Freyr's willingness to give Skirnir his sword in order to win Gerdur. Loki's Quarrel is a funny poem, but its humor is charged with horror, both at Loki's shamelessness and at the revelations about the gods. Is the poem serious critique of the pagan deities, perhaps composed by a Christian who wants to reveal them as hypocrites and cowards? Or is the poem the work of someone who was secure in his belief, who wanted to show that the gods are indeed different from us and that their fulfillment of their divine functions cannot be comprehended within human ethical frameworks? Very likely, Loki's quarrel was understood differently at different times in its existence. Much depends on the nuance imparted by the performer. But it's not hard to feel by the end of it that perhaps the world will be better off without this rabble. Loki made good his escape from the furious gods, turning himself into a salmon and hiding in a waterfall. Snorri's account of his capture elaborates on this. Loki built himself a house in the mountains near the waterfall and lurked under water by day. One evening he began to speculate about how Aesir might manage to catch him in his fish form. Picking up some linen thread, he made a prototype fishing net. Then, realizing that Odin had spotted him from his high seat, Lidskjalf, and that the gods were on their way to the hideout, he quickly threw the net in the fire and dived into the water. The wisest of the gods, named here as Kvazit, the one whose blood gave rise to the meat of poetry, saw the pattern the net made in the ashes and deduced what its purpose must be. The gods quickly replicated the device, and, although Salmon Loki jumped over it, he was eventually captured mid-leap by Thor, who had waded into the middle of the river. Though Loki slithered as fast as he could through Thor's hands, his tail caught in the god's fist. This explains why salmon taper markedly towards the tail and why they leap out of the water when making their way upstream. Loki now finds himself in peril. He is not surrendered to the gods under prearranged conditions, but rather he is their captive. The gods take 3 great flat rocks, set them edge upwards, and make a hole in each slab. Loki's sons are seized and transformed into wolves. Nari tears his brother Narfi into pieces, and the gods use Narfi's guts to bind his father to the rock. The guts tighten magically into iron bonds. As a final flourish, Skadi hangs a poisonous serpent over Loki's face, venom dripping from its fangs. And Sigyn, Loki's wife, now stands by her husband, holding a basin to catch the poison. Every now and then she must turn away to empty it, and when the venom falls onto Loki's face, he writhes horribly in his bonds. The cause of earthquakes, Loki's final break with the Aesir raises some interesting questions. His usual mode of operation has been as an ambivalent figure, siding inconsistently with the giants but also helping the gods recover stolen items, and he has a particular role as Thor's sidekick. Why this now? In suggestion links Loki's behaviors to the various prophecies concerning Ragnarok. Just as Fenrir first must be bound if he is to break his getters and attack the gods on that final day, so Loki must also be confined if he is to sunder his bonds to lead the giants against his former companions. And thus he must provoke the gods into binding him through the twin offenses of bringing about Baldur's death and by his bravura display of insults in Loki's quarrel. If Baldur's death is a portent of Ragnarok, then Baldur must die, and Loki must be bound. This assumes a chronological coherence to the tales surviving from what must have been a great corpus of varying myths originating in different parts of the Norse-speaking world. But even if the idea of Loki possessing a master plan strains credulity, there's certainly a strong sense that the fate of gods is already determined, that, despite Odin's efforts to see whether the prophesied future can be falsified or forestalled, the end is already written. Suggestive, too, as noted above, is the fact that Snorri knows one of Loki's sons, the brother-killing wolf, as Vali, sharing the name of Odin's newly begotten son who kills his half-brother Ho. Themes of fratricide, of vengeance, of those apocalyptic beasts, wolves and serpents, run through their two tales in a way that underlines the fundamental link between the two gods, Odin and Loki. The sinister corpse ship Naglfari, made of dead men's nails, has set sail from the east with fire giants as its crew. Loki is its steersman, bringing fiery destruction to the worlds of gods and men. Also advancing from the east comes Hermr, another frost giant leader, and in the ocean the huge coils of the Midgard serpent are thrashing, and Fenrir finally has snapped the silken fetter that has held him in thrall all these ages and is loping on the loose. The last battle and the deaths of the gods. Now the long prophesied single combat come to pass. Odin walks boldly forward to face the wolf, but the god of the spear finds that Gungnir is of no help to him, and Fenrir swallows him in one mighty gulp. Frigg weeps to see her husband die. Frigg, dear beloved, the poem calls him, comparing his death to that of Balder, as Frigg's second sorrow. The goddesses mourn in the sidelines as the gods shoulder their shields against their mortal foes. Next up is Thor, encountering once again his old enemy, the Midgard serpent. The god brings the great snake down, but staggering only 9 paces away from the corpse, he too falls, overcome by the serpent's might and venomous breath. Snorri adds some details which are not known from anywhere else. They may be traditional or may be product of his own instinct for organization. Freyr goes against Surtur, and now, as Loki foretold, he must surely regret the lack of the sword he gave away for the giant girl Gerdur. The great dog Garmr, whose terrible howling presaged Ragnarok, brings down Tyr. That God's past history with Fenrir gives rise to the suspicion that Garmr and Fenrir are indeed the same, and that the wolf has unfinished business with the god whose hand he snapped off. Heimdallr and Loki contend against one another, not for the first time, and each slaughter the other. The gods do make some headway against the monsters. Vidar, Odin's son, leaps into Fenrir's maw. His feet are protected from the wolf's fangs by the thick-soled shoes he wears. Every time soul material is clipped from toes to heels, Snorri tells us in an aside, this contributes to Vidar's footwear. With one hand he reaches to the wolf's upper jaw and tears him asunder. Heimdallr and Loki in conflict. Tradition tells us that Heimdallr and Loki have met in combat before. On that occasion, they fought out in the sea on a skerry called Singastein, both adopting seal form for the battle. The bone of contention was possession of the Brisinga men, Freya's great neck ring, which had somehow come into Loki's hands. Heimdallr wins the fight and restores the precious jewelry to the goddess. Vafthrûnir identifies further Aesir who will form the new generation of gods. Vidar, avenger of his father Odin, Vali, avenger of his brother Balder, Modi and Magni, Thor's 2 sons, who will wield Mjolnir, their father's weapon. Vafthrûnir's vision is less optimistic than the vision of the seeress. The return of the sons of Odin and Thor suggests the resumption of the old patterns of living, of vengeance and violence reasserting themselves. There's none of the emphasis on reconciliation that we find in the seeress's prophecy, no mention of the twin victims of Loki's terrible malice, Hodr and Balder, coming to terms, their brotherhood renewed. Even in the new world envisioned by the seeress, and despite the miraculous return of the lost golden checkers, there are signs that ineluctable systems are again at work, that the clock is ticking down to the next renewal. Once Honir has set up home in Odin's former territory, he begins to cut wooden slips for prophecy. Fate is still operating. The very last thing that the seeress, before she sinks down in the trance, is the dragon Nidhogger, the monstrous serpent who used to attack Yggdrasil, flying through the sky bearing corpses in his wings. This seems ominous. Some have suggested that this detail marks the seeress's return to the now of her vision, and that, as her prophecy draws to its close, she sees the flight of the dragon in the present. Others have wondered whether Nidhogger has a positive role in the brand new world, and is clearing away the last vestiges of the final battle by carrying off the corpses. But there's no compelling reason to think that the new world will not go the same way as the old, that evil and corruption will not manifest themselves once again, perhaps through a different vector of Loki and his giant allies, and that Ragnarökr, the dark before the dawn, will fall again and again through the cycle of ages.